Where was the first place European explorers landed in the Americas? Was it Mexico, the United States, Brazil? Well, actually, it was Greenland over 1,000 years ago. But when discussing the more recent European colonialism, the first ships to set sail from the Old World led by Christopher Columbus landed in an unknown island in the Lucayan archipelago, what we refer to today as the modern-day Bahamas. Subsequent waves of Europeans had very volatile interactions with the natives of these islands, to say the least, but with the introduction of Old World diseases into the native population, their fate was set as soon as the first interactions between these two wildly disparate populations took place. And it's claimed that by the year 1600, only 100 years after first contact, virtually the entire Taino ethnicity and other natives of the Caribbean had gone extinct through a combination of enslavement, warfare, and epidemics, completely changing the demographic landscape of this region forever. What exactly is the Caribbean, though? Well, other than being used to describe the large open body of water connected to the Atlantic Ocean as a geographic descriptor, the Caribbean region, or West Indies as it is colloquially known, is generally used to describe the various island chains that box in the Caribbean Sea from the Atlantic Ocean, divided into a number of archipelagos stretching from South America to North America, including the Lesser Antilles in the east, which includes Barbados, Trinidad, and others, the ABC Islands in the south, which includes Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao, three constituent countries of the Netherlands, the Greater Antilles in the west, which includes Cuba, Hispaniola, Jamaica, and Puerto Rico, and finally the Lucayan Archipelago in the north, which includes the Bahamas, Turks, and Caicos Islands. At European contact, there were around 1 million people living throughout the Caribbean, including over 700,000 on the island of Hispaniola, which on this one island would have been a population density about the same as Argentina today, or 3 times higher than that of Canada. However, keep in mind that these early Caribbean natives were not a single unified ethno-linguistic group and arrived in their new island home at varying points in time, although interestingly, nearly all of them seem to have originated from South America rather than North America, despite the distance and close proximity to the mainland of both continents. But it's actually now known that virtually all Amerindian tribes in the Caribbean started on the northern coast of South America, what is now Venezuela, and proceeded to move north along the Lesser Antilles, hopping from island to island in various waves, and settling down along the way. The most archaic and isolated group were people located on the farthest western tip of Cuba and the nearby island of Juventud that were dubbed by the Spanish as the Guanahatabe, and were not related to any other known Caribbean natives or those from the mainland. As a hunter-gatherer society, the Guanahatabe were most likely descended from the first, or at least the oldest surviving migration wave from the mainland, most likely at least 3,100 BC. That's older than most of the pyramids of Egypt, at over 5,000 years old, although Amerindians have inhabited South America for at least 10,000 years. The next wave of migrants to enter the Caribbean were the Taino, perhaps the most widely distributed and most numerous people group in the region, and were distantly related to a larger ethnic macrogroup known as the Arawakan peoples from the mainland of South America, with the Tainos spreading out to the Bahamas, Puerto Rico, Jamaica, Hispaniola, and most of the remainder of Cuba, divided between a few main groupings which may or may not have been mutually intelligible. The other major group of the Caribbean was the Carobs, a smaller Arawakan ethnic group located in the Lesser Antilles. And before you ask, it was actually the Caribbean that was named after the Carib people, rather than the people being named after the region. The situation gets a bit more complicated for Trinidad and Tobago, which actually have multiple indigenous peoples, including the aforementioned island Carobs, as well as the Locono and Warao, while Aruba, Bonaire, and Curaçao were originally inhabited by Arawakan Caquito people, though due to their isolation from the rest of the Caribbean islands, their culture was more similar to that on the mainland than in the Greater Antilles. Areas that are also often associated with the Caribbean, such as Bermuda in the Atlantic Ocean, and the Cayman Islands in between Mexico and Jamaica, actually had no indigenous population by the time the first Europeans arrived, but that doesn't mean their modern populations don't have any Amerindian blood, as migrants brought from other Caribbean islands may have had partial native ancestry. So this leads us to what exactly happened to the million or so natives of the Caribbean, which, as you could guess, is quite the tragic history. As being the first area of the Americas that the Spaniards came across, it was also the first to be conquered and integrated into the Spanish Empire, with diseases such as measles, smallpox, and the flu being the greatest weapons of the Spanish, and the greater technological advancement of the Spanish put down any large-scale rebellions by the Taino. After this, many of the remaining natives were enslaved or fled to the interiors of the larger islands, although there was considerable intermixing between them, as many Spaniards who arrived on Hispaniola or Cuba often took Taino wives, with their mestizo offspring often becoming conquistadors themselves and aiding in the conquest of the rest of the New World. However, by and large, the biggest demographic change to occur to the Caribbean islands would be the importation of slaves from sub-Saharan Africa, who were quickly pumped in to replace the dwindling Taino population, and they would proceed to eventually become the majority in the French and British Caribbean territories, while in the Spanish territories it was a bit different, as most of the time the Spanish or mestizo men would intermix with these imported Africans, creating a new hybridized population. There are even some accounts of escaped African slaves moving and integrating into Taino villages, although eventually the entirety of the populations of these islands would become Hispanicized, with the Taino and African languages being replaced by Spanish, and racial identification on the island becoming rather fluid, with all inhabitants eventually becoming more or less connected in some way. Although anecdotes of surviving Taino exist well into the 1600s in the Greater Antilles, one of the only regions where the natives were able to actually survive the conquest, disease, and massacres were in the smaller islands, with England and France agreeing to make Dominica and St. Vincent into a Carob or Kalinago refuge, although eventually England would annex these islands as well, and with the importation of Africans to these islands, it would appear that the last of the native Caribbeans were about to be washed away forever. However, a group of escaped African slaves from St. Vincent would actually end up intermixing with some of the native Carobs, creating a hybrid Afro-Amerindian or Zambo people that were highly opposed to the British rule, and ended up being deported to Central America, where their descendants are known as the Garifuna, or Guaranagua today, still speaking their own distinct Arawakan dialect rather than English or Spanish, being located mostly in Honduras and Belize. In Dominica, however, the Kalinago actually did survive in the northeast corner of the island, making them the last remnants of the pre-contact indigenous Carobs, although in recent years there's been substantial intermixing with their neighbors in Dominica, leaving only a few hundred full-blooded members remaining, as most in the Kalinago community have African or European ancestry as well, but they're still quite the vibrant community, making up around 3% of the island and growing actually. Due to the history of intermixing with many of the Caribbean natives, their genetics, and possibly even to a greater extent, their culture and traditions still live on in almost every modern nation in the region, as most Afro-Caribbeans have a degree of European and smaller Amerindian admixture, and in the case of the Hispanic Caribbean, it's been found through genetic studies that the whiter any individual is in these nations, the more likely it is that Amerindian DNA makes up a greater part of their non-European ancestry. In total, Native American ancestry still continues to make up around 7% of the overall genome of the entire Caribbean, greatly depending, of course, on self-identified ethnicity as well as region, as it's been found that mixed-race Puerto Ricans have around 20 to 25% Taino ancestry, while groups like the Haitians have almost none, existing only in trace amounts, suggesting a total population replacement. This may not sound like a whole lot, but out of the total population of the Caribbean being 45 million people today, this is equivalent to around 3.2 million full-blooded Caribbean Native Americans, with the highest geographic concentration being in Puerto Rico and the Dominican Republic, although the modern Caribbean island with the highest percentage of Amerindian admixture as a proportion of the national gene pool would be Aruba. Not terribly surprising, seeing how it is one of the closest islands to the mainland. Even in most Anglo-West Indian countries, Afro-Caribbeans still have varying amounts of Amerindian DNA on average, possibly as high as 3 or 4% in Jamaica and the Virgin Islands, 5% in the Bahamas, and between 6 to 8% in St. Kitts, St. Vincent, Grenada, and St. Lucia, and possibly even higher than this in the Afro-Trinidadian population. Compare this to Black Americans in the United States, who on average have only 1% Native American blood, or the average white American who has even less than that, and it would appear that the United States, and I suppose Haiti as well, are some of the sole anomalies of the Americas, that being some of the only places in the hemisphere where Native American ancestry is not as widespread, as even in most parts of the Caribbean, their Native American genetics and heritage still lives on in the present day. In Puerto Rico, there has been a bit of a Taino cultural revival, with many embracing their indigenous roots, and in the 2010 U.S. Census, around 10,000 Puerto Ricans identified as Native American, being an interesting example of an ethnic group being revived literally from extinction, although many members of this Neo-Taino community have argued that there is simply a continuation of the former Taino people and culture, although it's unknown if these self-identified Taino have any more Native American DNA on average, or whether they just have the right amount of European and African DNA to look vaguely native. But either way, their embracing of their Amerindian heritage is part of a wider movement in Latin America to identify with the whole of their ancestry, uniting the region in their uniquely shared history, with the Taino, Carobs, and other Arawakan people native to the Caribbean being one of the most important chapters in that history. So please let me know your thoughts on the natives of the Caribbean, and for today's poll, let me know which region of the Caribbean you'd like to learn more about, either in reference to their native people groups or the modern people who live there today. As always, this has been Mason. Thanks for watching, everyone, and I'll see you next time.